Welcome to this month's lecture on the history of Freemasonry. I'm Ozan Arslan, and I have the pleasure and the honor to be today's chair. Today's lecture is entitled Transcending the Public and the Private, the Cosmopolitanism of Freemason Joseph-Honoré Rémy, and our speaker is Dr. Frank Ejby Poulsen. Frank, I didn't have a chance to ask you about the correct pronunciation in Danish, and I hope that's the correct one. Published in 1770, Le Cosmopolitism by Joseph-Honoré Rémy is the first pamphlet in France and in French to elaborate upon a political philosophy of cosmopolitanism. And it is a pamphlet on the first page of which Rémy quotes Publius Terentius Afer Homo sum humani nihil ame alienum puto. I am human and I think nothing human is alien to me. For those among you who would be interested, a digital copy of the original French language edition of the pamphlet is available on Gallica, the online digital library of Bibliothèque Nationale de France, French National Library. And today, Dr. Poulsen will first present a biography of Joseph-Honoré Rémy with original elements concerning his membership of the well-known Masonic Lodge of the Nine Sisters. Then he will also analyze his pamphlets, arguing that Rémy's cosmopolitanism is a way of transcending the public and the private. Dr. Poulsen is a postdoctoral researcher in intellectual history at the Center for Privacy Studies, University of Copenhagen. He has won several scholarships to hold research fellowships at the Danish Academy in Rome, the Enlightenment Research Center at the University of Hull, and then the University of California at Berkeley. His research at privacy focuses on notions of privacy in early modern political thought, notably through the labeling of some topics as private or quote-unquote public, and the practice of producing knowledge from private circles to the Republic of Letters. His forthcoming monograph, Cosmopolitan Republicanism in the French Revolution, the political thought of Anacharsis Clout and Thomas Paine, won the Reuters 10th anniversary open access book competition. So after a lecture of approximately 40 minutes, we will have a Q&A session. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Poulsen for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Ozan, and hello everyone. I must say I'm very, very, very excited, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's really thrilling. It's the first time that I'm invited or can found my articles somehow that had just been published and so invited me to present, and it's really exciting to be able to present my work to you. So thank you very much for inviting me. Also, thank you very much for allowing me to present in English, although I assume it's the lingua franca because you're not all Turkish, but in any case, thank you for my Turkish is not is non-existent. The only thing I know in Turkish is I have a very good friend of mine. We were flatmate for a while, and I asked him once, "Can you teach me a useful sentence in Turkish?" And he said, "Yeah, sure. Repeat after me. Neptün büyük bir gaz gezegenidir." And he assured me that this was very useful. I'm not sure if I butchered it completely, but for those of you who may not understand Turkish, and for those who do and who may not have understood my complete butchering, it means that Neptune is a giant gas planet. From Neptune and the cosmos to Earth and cosmopolitanism, that's the topic of my talk today. Let me share the screen. I should first start my presentation. Right. Hopefully you're seeing the presentation view and not the presenter's view. Everything is fine?
Yes, Frank, very much. We're seeing the right version.
Good. So yes, so the topic is an obscure pamphlet, or not very known pamphlet by also not very well-known author named Joseph-Honoré Rémy, which was called Le Cosmopolitisme, published in 1770, as you presented. And let me tell you perhaps a little bit of the origin story. It's not changing. Good. So as you mentioned, I wrote my PhD thesis entitled Cosmopolitan Republican and French Revolution. And this is sort of an offshoot from my thesis because I wanted to focus on cosmopolitanism. And looking at cosmopolitanism, I had seen this work, and I just mentioned it in passing. And then I got this postdoc position where I am now at the Center for Privacy Studies at the University of Copenhagen. And last year, we organized a conference with the Society for Early Modern French Studies on the private and public sphere. And I presented what has now been published as an article in Early Modern French Studies about this pamphlet that I decided that I would expand upon. So why you should be interested? I mean, what I'm going to present is, first of all, that Rémy was a Freemason. So for those of you interested in the history of Freemasonry, that is interesting in itself. But also, if you're interested, and I think it's a highly relevant and topic nowadays, if you're interested in cosmopolitanism. So that's also interesting to see the genesis and the history of this philosophy. Rémy is perhaps, at least in French, and to the best of my knowledge, is the first author to publish a book that has the title Cosmopolitanism in it, and is an elaboration upon the philosophy of cosmopolitanism. And as I will show in presenting the author in his biography, he was an homme de lettres, as you may say, so well read and well connected within the intellectual networks of his time. And so I see this pamphlet, and I argue that you can read it as some taking the zeitgeist, if you want, of the time, of what represents cosmopolitanism, because at the time cosmopolitanism was not a word that was very frequent at all. Cosmopolitan was, but not cosmopolitanism. So that's why I think it's at least a very interesting topic and subject. So the way I'm presenting it is following very much the structure of my article, and Ozan has also very kindly already mentioned. So first of all, I want to present to you this Joseph-Honoré Rémy, who published this work, Le Cosmopolitisme, in 1770. And I hope to show you that, yes, he was some sort of compiler of the ideas of his time. He's taking a lot of different ideas and forming them into this cosmopolitanism, putting them into this word. And then I want to go into the nitty-gritty, the meat of it. So look at the book in itself, and in two parts. First, to present what is a cosmopolitan. So Rémy is writing as a cosmopolite, and I will go into describing the context at the time of what cosmopolite meant. and argue that it had an authorial strategy and describe it. And then the third part is what is the cosmopolitanism that Rémy is describing, and show how it transcends the private-public divide. So, who was Joseph-Honoré Rémy? Joseph-Honoré Rémy was born in 1738 and died after a short illness in 1782. Concerning sources, there are really very few sources. The only secondary source that I could find was this Dictionnaire des journalistes, the dictionary of journalists, and there's an entry. It's a dictionary of all the journalists from 1600 to 1789 in France, and there's an entry for Rémy written by Robert Grandroute. So that's the only thing. And then there is also the necrology in the Mercure de France when Joseph-Honoré Rémy died in 1782, and he was the editor. So these are the main sources, and then there are a few other bits that one can find, but yeah, these are the only two. So mostly I'm sort of taking from Grandroute and translating into English, but I'm also adding many elements, and mostly also that Rémy was a Freemason, which is not in the notice. So as I said, he was born in Rémy-Raymond, which is here on the map of France. You can see it's in the east. He studied philosophy and humanities in Rémy-Raymond, in Toul, and in Paris. Toul is also not far away on the map from Nancy, and that's also where he decided to embrace a career, an ecclesiastical career. So at the time, ecclesiastical career was a good choice for someone who wanted to study but didn't have money. He actually did not complete, so he didn't. He was not ordained priest, and he didn't receive the tonsure. We do have evidence that he, at occasions, practiced as an abbot, but that's why his title is just Abbé Rémy, and that's how he was known. He decided to earn a living instead to become a barrister at the Palais Royal. And so after he moved to Paris and he studied, he followed several courses. There were open courses, and educated himself further. And he also befriended a barrister. And at the time, that's how you became a barrister, just read law and had a friend who was a barrister. And this is described in Mercure de France in the necrology, and he's described as a barrister who only took the cases of the poor and defended those who had not the possibility to defend themselves. And so that's a bit of a contradiction, because he was supposedly a barrister to earn a living. And that's how I found that he was a Freemason, is that he was a member of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, and in the regulation of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, it says that professions that can help the public, so doctors or barristers, should very much do so, and as it says, voler au secours de l'humanité, so should help and assist the persons in need, and that's what he was doing. So I should say a few words about the Lodge of the Nine Sisters. And by all means, I am really not an historian of Freemasonry. I just, because I was researching on this Rémy and who he was, and I found this pamphlet interesting, I then found out more about Freemasonry and the Lodge of the Nine Sisters. So it was created in 1776. Officially, it came out. It was created and is the brainchild of Claude Adrien Helvétius and Joseph Lalande. So I don't know if you know Helvétius, but he was a famous and radical writer at the time, and he had already created a large Freemasonry that was dedicated to science. And Lalande was his very good friend. And after Helvétius died, Lalande took upon his project that he wanted to expand to and create a lodge that would also include all the arts. And that's the reference for the Nine Sisters, is the reference to the nine muses of the arts. Right. So this lodge was actually very famous within a few years. First of all, because Rémy won a prestigious competition by the Académie Française, Prix d'Éloquence, the year after in 1777. For it was at the time. So every year there is a topic, which is a famous person who died, and you have to write a eulogy to this person, and then they choose the best one. And Rémy won the competition. He even won over Condorcet, and that made the lodge quite famous. Another highlights of the lodge was that it had a ceremony to how do you say, ordain, not ordain, but to sorry, my to include Voltaire in and Rémy was there, and Lalande was there also, and Benjamin Franklin was also a member when he was in France of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters. So quite an important lodge. Rémy has published, because Le Cosmopolitisme is actually one of the very first one. It was published in 1770. And the same year, he also published another book, which was a satirical version of a book published in English by Young, which was called The Nights, and was just translated into French. And he, for some reason, really didn't like it, and then wrote a satirical version called The Days in French. And as mentioned, so he published the Éloge de Michel de l'Hôpital, so this eulogy to this former ministers of France, which won the prize of this competition for eloquency at the French Academy in 1777. But he's perhaps mostly famous for Le Code des Français, which is a codex of laws and jurisprudence, opinions by lawyers that actually Voltaire also possessed in his library. So Voltaire knew Rémy, even though in some letter he's writing that he didn't know him, and he was surprised that this Rémy, who was unknown, won over Condorcet, who was more famous to him. Other very important work that he participated to was the Encyclopédie méthodique, the methodical encyclopedia. This work was conceived as a supplement to the Encyclopédie by Diderot and d'Alembert. and he worked on the first and second volume, which was on jurisprudence, and wrote several articles about it. He also participated to an edition of the complete works of Voltaire. So this project that he worked on, the Encyclopédie méthodique, was launched by Charles-Joseph Panckoucke. And maybe some of you may know him. He was a famous writer and publisher, and he launched the publication of this supplement to the Encyclopedia. He owned the Mercure de France, so he was publishing this, and Rémy was a very good friend. He was even the right hand of Panckoucke. He was often at his house. He was acting when Panckoucke was away on business trip. He was acting on his behalf, receiving authors and signing contracts for him. He was he knew the family and so on. So also Panckoucke organized literary salons, and so Rémy was there, and all this to say that Rémy was really at the center of a Parisian intellectual hub. When he died, there was a eulogy for him also in a famous newspaper at the time that was really mourning his loss as a loss for the humanities and for the literary world. So he was at his he died at a young age, but he was at the time quite famous. So that's why I think that even though he wrote in 1770, that he can be understood as an important figure, and that le cosmopolisme can be also understood as him compiling many different bits and ideas about cosmopolitanism, which was not present. There were no treaties of cosmopolitanism. We have today an understanding of what cosmopolitanism is, but at that day, even the word was almost unheard of. On the other hand, a word that cosmopolitanism is based on is the cosmopolitan, and that was a word that was very popular in the second half of the 18th century. So I'm now going to talk about this word, the cosmopolite, cosmopolitan. So it's in the work. It appears in the forewords, or that the translator is calling the author of the work a cosmopolitan. Ce cosmopolite n'aspire nullement à nos honneurs littéraires. Son objet est rempli s'il contribue à maintenir l'intelligence entre des nations moins alliées qu'ennemies. So this cosmopolitan aspire not to literary honors, but his sole aim is to maintain intelligence between nations which are more allied than enemies. So I want to put this into context. What was a cosmopolitan at the time? So first of all, etymology, of course, you know probably that it's from Greek cosmopolites, and which can translate as citizen of the world. And it comes from, of course, Diogenes of Sinope. Put here a nice postcard. I heard that there is a statue of him in Sinope that is quite controversial. Maybe you can tell me why it is controversial. I'm not sure. But in any case, famously, you know, he was asked where he's from, and he just to get rid of this person disturbing him, said that I'm a cosmopolitan. I'm a citizen of the world. So if I'm not by all means an expert in Greek antiquity, but I'm sure if some of you are, you know that cosmos is both designating world and order, some kind of harmony. And polis is usually translated as city-state, but if you know that it comes from politeia, and you know also that it's very rough definition, it's the body of citizen, it's the political sphere of the city. Yeah. So in any case, in French, I'm focusing here on the French language. So the word cosmopolite doesn't exist in the 1690 dictionary, Furetière's dictionary. So it only appears in the dictionary in 1721 in the Dictionnaire de Trévoux. However, in the Furetière 1690 dictionary, it's sort of implied. There's no entry for cosmopolite, but there's an entry for patrie, the homeland, and it mentions that a philosopher is everywhere in his homeland. Maybe you know the Latin saying "ubi bene, ibi patria," and that's the sort of idea. But in the Dictionnaire Trévoux in 1721, there is an entry for cosmopolitain, cosmopolitaine, which explains that it's sorry, it's a man who has no fixed home, or a man whose no place is strange, or who's not a stranger in any place. And then it makes a reference to Diogenes of Sinope, and it's unsure about the correct grammar. Is it cosmopolitain or cosmopolite? It says it should be cosmopolitain because we say Napolitain. But then in the 1771 edition, it has a little addendum that now the usage is cosmopolite. Right. So cosmopolite as a word becomes very popular in the 18th century, and particularly in the second half of the 18th century, and is mostly used to describe both a traveler and a philosopher. It's particularly made famous in a book written by Fougeray de Montbron called Le Cosmopolite ou le Citoyen du Monde, so the Cosmopolitan or the Citizen of the World, which starts with a very famous sentence: L'univers est une espèce de livre dont on n'a lu que la première page quand on n'a vu que son pays. This was taken by Lord Byron in one of his books. So the universe is some kind of book, and one has only read the first page if one hasn't left one's own country. So the cosmopolite becomes this traveler slash philosopher who's reflecting on humankind and who's reflecting on his homeland. The whole point of this book is Fougeray de Montbron, who's traveling abroad because he's tired of his home. He finds everyone very annoying, and then he travels everywhere and he finds out that everyone else is just as annoying or perhaps more annoying. So then he comes back home and says, well, finally, maybe I shouldn't have left my country because people are less annoying than anywhere else. Anyways, it's a very cynical in a Diogenes kind of way, and it's well, if you know Fougeray de Montbron, it's very typical of him. Other examples, of course, it becomes a literary genre. The lettres persanes is the Persian letters is perhaps the example that is the most famous of this traveler that comes, and there it's a reflection upon your own homeland. Montesquieu is writing the Persian travelers who are finding everything strange in France and in Europe. There's another example with Oliver Goldsmith in England, and this book is also called The Citizen of the World. And here it's the example of a Chinese philosopher who's coming to England and finding everything peculiar and describing everything. So this this idea is also Voltaire in Candide, is also taken by Voltaire in Candide, and actually Voltaire was influenced by Fougeray de Montbron. So there's a whole literary genre of this philosopher slash traveler reflecting on the unity and the diversity of the world. But the cosmopolite is also used with a political sense, and the first perhaps political sense is used by Rousseau in his Discours sur l'origine et les fondements de l'inégalité parmi les hommes, discourse on the origins of inequality among men. So he writes about these grandes âmes cosmopolites qui franchissent les barrières imaginaires qui séparent les peuples, et qui, à l'exemple de l'être souverain qui les a créés, embrassent tout le genre humain dans leur bienveillance. So he's describing these great cosmopolitan souls who are these authors who cross the imaginary borders that separates people, and who embrace the whole human race, just as the sovereign being has created it. So this is, he's actually describing many authors who have written about natural law and the jus gentium, and this I will talk about in a little while. And just to, because this is a bit of a strange thing, is that you can see 7 years after in Les Milles, which is actually the bestseller and the thing that people were reading, as well as La Nouvelle Héloïse at the time, and they were not reading the Discours sur l'inégalité, or they were not reading the social contract. So he's writing in Les Milles quite the contrary, that you should really not trust these cosmopolitans who are looking away in books for duties that they do not fulfill at home, and this is yeah, maybe some evolution. It goes to show that you maybe sometimes you can't really apply some sort of unity in the thinking of a philosopher. So this political sense, we can see it in both either a negative sense or in a positive sense. Let me say a few things about the negative sense. In the dictionary of the French Academy in 1762, a cosmopolitan is described as someone who does not choose a country, a homeland, a patrie. So by definition, a cosmopolitan is not a good citizen, because a good citizen is someone who, as Rousseau mentioned, fulfills one's duty at home, right? And this is also the same idea that Voltaire is describing in his Dictionnaire philosophique. He's not saying that it's bad to be a cosmopolitan, but he's lamenting that in order to be a good patriot, you necessarily have to be an enemy to the rest of humankind. So there is this tension between patriotism on the one hand and cosmopolitanism. But the cosmopolite can also be, as that was what Rousseau was referring to, can be political in a positive sense, which is not just negative of not being a good citizen of one's patrie, homeland, but also of creating something. So all these authors, it started in the 17th century with natural law and jus gentium because of the horrors of the 30 Years' War, because of the Projet pour rendre la paix perpétuelle en Europe was written in 1713 by Saint-Pierre, is also a there are many projects to try to implement a sort of peace in Europe, which is a war-torn country, and mainly because of ambitions from royal sovereigns, and they try to defend the individual against the state. So these are the great cosmopolitan soul that Rousseau was previously referring to. So cosmopolitan here is in a political sense with a positive sense, political. Now, I want to talk about the cosmopolitan as an authorial rhetorical stance, because perhaps because the cosmopolitan is seen as this philosopher, traveler, and this person who's trying to devise a positive political sphere for Europe, then it's being more and more used as an authorial function. And there's a study by Sophia Rosenfeld where she calls it monikers. I don't think I would agree with the term moniker, but certainly cosmopolitan is used as there are many authors who write as a cosmopolitan, and then this creates a sort of a transnational space for authors in the Republic of Letters. As a cosmopolitan, they put themselves as member of a boundaryless community of humankind, where they write about what they perceive as truth and objectivity. So many examples of these you can see this book published called Réflexions d'un cosmopolite, so reflections by a cosmopolitan, and the person writes, I'm going to read, habitant du monde entier et versé un peu dans la connaissance des affaires du monde, je suis, autant que l'homme le peut être, exempt de ces préventions qui influencent tyranniquement sur les jugements. So basically, he's writing that he's an inhabitant of the world, of the entire world, and as such, he also has a good knowledge of what's going on in the world, and he thinks that he is free of any judgment, free of any engagement, and so can provide an objective view and not a national biased view upon such affairs. Another example, Lettre d'un cosmopolite à l'ombre de Calas. So letter by a cosmopolitan on the affair called the Calas affair. So the Calas affair was a case in France that was defended by Voltaire. It was Calas was a man, a Protestant, who was executed after a mock trial for allegedly killing his son, who for killing his son, who allegedly had converted to Catholicism. And so there was a lot of discussion that it was he was then reinstated and was considered not guilty of this, and it was a big case at the time. So here you have again a cosmopolitan who's sort of writing as a unbiased person. So another example is the Café Politique d'Amsterdam, and this is actually an ex-minister whose name is Roche-Antoine de Pélissieri, and he's pretending in this pamphlet to be a cosmopolitan in discussion with a Frenchman, an Englishman, and a Dutchman. Actually what he's really doing in this pamphlet is just presenting his own view, which are absolutely not unbiased. But the point is to show that this cosmopolitan is used as a authorial rhetorical stance. So Rémy is, it's actually complicated because in this pamphlet, so the pamphlet is anonymous, and it's supposedly an Englishman who is a cosmopolitan, and the work is supposedly translated from English into French by the translator, who calls the author a real cosmopolitan. So it's playing on many levels, and of course it's also because you want to avoid censorship, but you have some sort of subverted ways of still criticizing politics and criticizing the state of affairs, particularly in France. So he's pretending to be an Englishman, and he's criticizing England. Of course, England and France are have been enemies for many years, and this comes also out after the 7 Years' War. So criticizing England is easier if he's an Englishman, but the French reader can also see and knows, and he writes also in the introduction that the reader would know who the author is. So you have to assume that readers at the time are in the known, so they sort of know, even though the author is anonymous, they know that it must be Rémy. So they know that he's French, and when he's criticizing England, he could just as well be criticizing France, because he's criticizing a king who's waging war. So it's really not particular to England, right? So I think he's also, called a cosmopolitan because he's again trying to embrace and present a view that is in favor of humankind, humanity, and he's presenting this cosmopolitanism that we will see. And unlike the other author, I wouldn't say that he's completely biased and just abusing the rhetorical stance as Pellissieri was. And I think he's sort of a genuine cosmopolitan, if you want, even though I'm going to present now his cosmopolitanism in a few minutes, but and that is of course a very Eurocentric view. But what I mean is that for the time it's sort of impartial. So to sum up on the cosmopolitan. And I want here to show you. So this is a working tool that we have at the Center for Privacy Studies, because we study thresholds of the private sphere. That so you can have the private soul and the mind and the body, then the chamber or your studio, and then the home, and then the community, and then the state. And this cosmopolitan is sort of crossing this threshold. It's a private person who's participating in a community that is the Republic of Letter, but as a national or a foreigner. And he's commenting on internal public affairs, so in the state society, but he's also commenting upon world affairs. So I'm sort of adding here another layer to our tool. So let's go to the meat of it and the cosmopolitanism. As I said, it's, I think, an important book because it's the first book in French, at least, that has cosmopolitanism is in its title, and that elaborate upon what could be understood as a philosophy of cosmopolitanism. And it is the one of the first uses of the word in a political sense in 18th century France. So again, a bit of context about the word cosmopolitanism. Just to give you an idea, in 1801, there was a dictionary of new words or neologies by Mercier. And the word cosmopolisme appears. So it shows that it was a new word even in 1801, right? And it's actually quite funny. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, because I suppose not all of you understand or know French, but cosmopolism is not, today in French you say cosmopolitisme and not cosmopolism. And that also shows that it's a new word. So they just like cosmopolitain and cosmopolite, people didn't know which one to use, so they use cosmopolism instead of cosmopolitism. So in English it would be as saying cosmopolism instead of cosmopolitanism. So this cosmopolism in this dictionary of new words is describing a disease. So if you suffer from cosmopolism, it's because you've been traveling too much, and you've sort of lost your sense of identity. And he writes that even a bird has a nest in a tree or in a rock. So this view of cosmopolism as a disease was also written, funnily enough. Oh, sorry. In another book on diseases, Recherches sur les maladies by Bourdieu and other authors in 1775, where they write that notre fureur d'aller, notre cosmopolitisme en tout genre peuvent devenir excessifs et entraîner bien des inconvénients. So again, our freedom, our fury to go everywhere, our cosmopolism is creating some sort of symptoms and diseases. So that's I don't know if you suffer from cosmopolitism. I sort of I think I suffer a bit of cosmopolitism. I was born in Denmark and I'm raised in France. My family is both in France and Denmark, and people always ask me, do you feel more French or Danish? And I never really know what to say. I'm sort of, I feel Italian actually. I like Italy very much. Another example is Castillon in the Discours sur l'origine de l'inégalité. And this is Castillon, he's writing an answer to Rousseau. And he's writing, if you remember that we just saw about the inequality. So he's writing with the same title as an answer to Rousseau. And he's writing that he has he's expressing a cosmopolism that is too deeply reasoned. So he's basically inventing the word. I think this is the first time the word cosmopolitism appears in French in this scathing attack on Rousseau and his ideas in the discourse on the inequality. Right. To say a few words about now the book Le Cosmopolisme. So it follows a rhetorical structure. It presents so ethos, logos, pathos. First, it presents the English narrator, and the point of, I think, writing as an English narrator is because there is the pamphlet is published when the Dauphin is getting married. So the future Louis the 16th in France is getting married to Marie Antoinette, and this is perceived as a threat because it's an alliance between powerful houses, and so I think that it's a way also of trying to write to Englishmen about trying to settle the European balance of power and to call for peace and not see it as a threat, a bit like you would see as a threat, well, any alliance between big powers. So a third power would see it as a big threat, right? And then he goes on, before describing, as I will show in a few minutes, what is cosmopolitanism, he goes on a reflection about history. So that's the logos part of the rhetorical structure. And he's not very happy with historians and history in general, and he writes that most of what is written in history is a glorification of wars in the name of the kings, so glorification of kings who wage wars, and sometimes even glorification of wars that are waged in the name of God. And then he writes about, on the other hand, nature that provides the human race an instinct, and this instinct that we all belong to the same human race is fraternity. I've heard you all call yourself brethren and salute yourself. So that's the sort of that's the idea. So then he goes to the question about cosmopolitanism. So the cosmopolitanism that he describes and that I'm going to explain to you now is the answer to a question that he sets in the beginning of the book. And the question in the book is if the spirit of nation is compatible with universal benevolence. So basically, is patriotism compatible with cosmopolitanism? So in a way, he's answering this issue that we have seen, right? And that Voltaire says that it's a shame that to be a good patriot, you have to be the enemy of the human race. And so his view to combine the two is cosmopolitanism, and he's asking rhetorically, why is cosmopolitanism so rare on our planet? Maybe I should read a little bit. So, à peine a-t-il un sens? Pourquoi le cosmopolisme est-il si rare sous cette planète? À peine a-t-il un sens parmi nous? La plupart de nos langues si riches en mots honteuses et barbares n'ont rien qui peigne les premiers sentiments de l'homme social. Un sourire risiblement dédaigneux est la récompense de quiconque ose parler d'humanité aux nations. Noble et touchante humanité, à ton foyer s'allume et s'épure dans nos âmes le feu sacré des vertus privées et des vertus publiques. So, in English, he's wondering why cosmopolitanism is such a rare word, and in our languages we have so many words that are shameful and barbaric, and there's no word to present what are the first feelings of social man. So it's this idea of fraternity in the state of nature, that we have a social feeling, and that's all the natural law and social contract theories that is being referred to here. And he's writing that you only encounter a smirk and disdain when you speak of humanity to nations. And he then writes that with humanity, then humanity is what warrants private and political virtues. And then there is a footnote which is interesting, because the footnote then refers to Fénelon, and he has a quote which is wrong, but the quote is that Fénelon said that he likes his family more than himself. He loves his homeland more than his family, and he loves the human race even more than, well, it should be the homeland. And then he goes on a eulogy, well, a eulogy. He's praising Fénelon for this moral sense that he had at court against what he sees as national egoism, and that he was the person who was preaching cosmopolitanism. So I will talk a little bit about Fénelon, but first let me go back to what he's writing about cosmopolitanism. Now there's a bit of text, I apologize. So he's writing about the first sentiments of social man. And as I said, if you look at the Encyclopedia in Society, you can see that it's a reference to the principle of sociability that comes and that is considered as inherent to human being, a universal sociability. Second of all, he speaks about humanity and again, a feeling, a sentiment of benevolence for all men, understand human. And then he writes, interestingly, about private virtues and political virtues. And this, I think, is a reference to Republican virtues, which are an important part of Republican thinking, and which again refer to Fénelon, as he's been mentioning. And here I want to talk about Fénelon. So François Fénelon, he was an archbishop, and he was in charge of tutoring the Dauphin, the Duke of Burgundy, during Louis XIV, in the end of the 17th century, was king. And the Duke of Burgundy was supposed to become the next king. He was the grandchild of Louis XIV. And in tutoring the Dauphin, the future, who unfortunately died in 1712, so he never became king. But he wrote this book, which had been published without his consent afterwards, Les Aventures de Télémaque, so the adventures of Telemachus, son of Ulysses. Sorry. Which became highly influential in all Europe. It was a huge, everyone basically read it, and among the Freemason, Fénelon was also a very important figure, and a figure that everyone looked upon. He was not himself a Freemason, but he was a very good friend of Ramsay, who the Chevalier Ramsay, who created, or who brought Freemasonry to France at the time. Anyways, maybe I should say a few words about the adventures of Telemachus. So obviously, it's a sort of it's imagining that Telemachus, the son of Ulysses, is looking for his father and is traveling. And while he's traveling, he has a figure that is tutoring him, because he's still a young man, and who's helping him. And for instance, he goes to what would be hell, and he sees what happens to bad kings, and that sort of things. And there are several important passages that I will present in the next slides. But it was considered a work of Republican monarchism, which means that it's both following monarchical rules, but also Republican virtues. And it's a work of classical republicanism, which, as I said, the Republican virtues from ancient Rome and Greece, which are common good, the love for the common good, the disinterest for wealth, and in general, a despise for everything that is the court, the royal court, and put the country before the court.
Frank, sorry for interrupting.
Sorry.
Could you please conclude in a few minutes? Would it be fine with you? Okay, thank you very much. Because then, I mean, we will have several interesting questions. Some of them are actually already on the chat board.
Yep. I'm sorry, I don't see, I only see my presentation, and yeah, I went a bit over time. I apologize. So just quickly in the Telemachus, he's this figure mentor is addressing the Greek kings and he's who are at wars with one another, and ask, is saying that you're making war, you're killing your own brothers, because we're all one family. The human race is one family, so you're spilling the blood of your brothers. And then he also presents the idea of a universal republic of kings, so a congress where kings would be meeting once a year in the parliament, and in order to maintain peace. Right, so there are parallels with this book with Fénelon. First of all, because it's published when the future king is getting married, and he's making a reference to Fénelon and the Telemachus, and Fénelon was a tutor to the king. So there is this idea that I want to show the king what is the principle that the future king should emulate. And for instance, he's writing about Henry IV, so another French king who was humane and magnanimous, and who also with the Duke of Sully had some plans for respecting the law of nation and uniting Europe in some congress of some sort. And he's also asking to not respond to the adulation in course and listen to the truth. And to govern, he's saying, well, to be a good king, you have to be a citizen king. And to do that, you have to both love the country, the patrie, and love the human race. So that's the interesting part, is that he doesn't see a contradiction in both. That you live in a time of enlightenment. There are enlightened kings and queens. He mentions Catherine in Russia, and these are sovereigns who are working for the common good. So in that sense, they are citizen king. He's not anti-monarchy. He's not like a Republican. Let's have a republic. He's very much still for the monarchy. But he's asking the monarchy to be as much in love of the common good inside the country, and to be adored abroad by respecting humanity. Right. So that's in essence what I was saying. And the cosmopolitanism, to conclude, that is being presented for the first time, as I said, is based on this idea that we have a universal reason that we all share. So this is something we can discuss, because this is something that is discussed today. If we can have cosmopolitanism as a philosophical principle based on idea of reason and truth, what does it mean? What is, why would your reason be more rational than my reason? Another thing is that it's based on universal sociability. So this sentiment of the first man, this idea of fraternity that infuse our private virtues and our political virtues. So as I said, how the king should maintain peace and not wage wars. So that would be the political virtues abroad, but also the private virtues at home. And this I find very interesting. We can discuss this nowadays. We have, as a private citizen, we look at what we consume. For instance, we look when you buy a device, or is it full of precious metals that are extracted in war-torn countries, or am I buying clothes that are made by forced labor or child labor in some foreign countries, or is it destroying the environment? So these are, private virtues that influence also the whole world. So yeah, I wanted to open perhaps the discussion on contemporary cosmopolitanism, based at least on this first work presenting cosmopolitanism in 1770. Thank you very much for your attention. And as Ozan said, you can keep in touch with me. Here's my email address. If you want the printed version of my article, I can send it to you. It's not in open access, unfortunately. I didn't have the money for that, but I can send it to you if you drop me an email. And thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward for all your questions.
Thank you very much, Frank. Fascinating subject, fascinating presentation. I will be promptly conveying the questions, actually. The first one, and at the end, if we will still have time, I would like to ask you also two very short questions, actually, to the point questions. The first question: how does today's notions of globalism and privacy in the internet era compare with the early notions of cosmopolitism and privacy as evolving in the 18th century? If cosmopolitism, quote unquote, was attacked as a disease then, what are the challenges and threats to the notions of globalism today? What would you say to that?
So thank you very much for your questions. So now we're jumping into the present, very much so. So I think it's a very tough question, and it's something that we're battling with nowadays. I started my PhD. I became interested in cosmopolitanism in a time when cosmopolitanism was very much in fashion in contemporary political theory and legal theory. So it appeared basically after the end of the Cold War. There was this euphoria for the end of history, and we have for the first time the possibility to create a global system with a system of governance that would avoid conflicts and bring more unity in the world. And nowadays, this euphorism is I think has led, at least for my part, a lot of pessimism. We have a strong resurgence of nationalism in the worst kind. That's actually also and I don't necessarily oppose nationalism to cosmopolitanism, and that's also an important part of my PhD thesis, and I want to write it in the book coming. But in ethno-nationalism and this kind of national egoism that Rémy is writing about, which at the time was royal nationalism, as kingdom. Egoism of the sovereign, the royal sovereign. So this we see a resurgence of this, I think, in the world, and yeah, I don't. I hope that there is some positive view about cosmopolitanism and that is not considered a disease. I think that we have nowadays, more than in the 18th century, access to all sorts of information and the possibility with the internet to learn about and to have in real time information about what is going on everywhere in the world. So we have all these inputs that even in our home, through devices, are challenging our worldview constantly, at least if we want to. And here that's your question about privacy. I'm not sure how you wanted to relate it to privacy, but it's certainly we have also a challenge with privacy in our own home with these electronic devices that are constantly interrupting us and demanding our attention and disrupting and even controlling our behavior by sending messages. We had examples with how elections were tampered with by using social media and by influencing voters. So in your home, you're being surveilled and influenced, and you don't even control your own mind because you're constantly thinking, oh, I have to check, did I get a message? Did I? Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. I believe Cécile Rébauger would like to ask you a question. Cécile
yes,
the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, fine. Well, thank you very much for this fascinating talk. And really, I think we are a republic of letters here at Open University on Freemasonry. So really, it's, I mean, it was a very well chosen subject. Right. Now, I was really very interested in this definition of cosmopolism, which I didn't know actually, because I always thought of, well, I was familiar with Fougeray de Montbron, with Goldsmith, but not with the term itself, cosmopolism. So you really showed that very well. Now, Ramsey, I think, was probably might have influenced him even more than Fénelon, because he was the author of this Republic of République universelle, La République universelle. But he didn't bring Freemasonry to France. Actually, there were lodges before him.
Okay.
But I mean, yes, he had a very important role in promoting this idea of République universelle. That's for sure. Also, if you're interested in Loge des Neuf Sœurs, are you familiar with Charles Pourcet? Because Charles Pourcet really re-edited his book on Loge des Neuf Sœurs, which was written by Amiable. And at the time, Amiable had made quite a few mistakes because he wanted to show that Freemasonry had been so important in the French Revolution. Right, now my question will rather concern the Illuminati, because of course this came just afterwards. But what do you think of the way the Illuminati were actually accused of cosmopolitanism? They were by Baruel and Robison, and that's when really the theory of the Masonic plot started. And one of the main grievances were that the Illuminati were cosmopolitans. And so that's something I wanted to ask. And finally, I think today, of course, cosmopolitism is rarely used when you think of it. And what we actually refer to constantly is universalism, l'universalism. So what difference would you make between cosmopolitism and universalism? But thank you again for this fascinating talk.
Thank you for the question, Frank.
Yes, so first it was about Pourcet's work and edition. So yeah, it's in my of course in my article, and I'm familiar with this. So perhaps I'll take the last question on cosmopolitanism and universalism first, and then go to the other question on the accusation of cosmopolitanism. So that's sort of easy for me. The difference between universalism and cosmopolitanism is that cosmopolitanism, in my view, first of all, it's an ideal, so it doesn't, in my view, exist yet. I don't think that anyone has devised a perfect philosophical principle of cosmopolitanism that works, and that is because cosmopolitanism is something that tries to unite both the universal and the local and the particular. It's so what contemporary cosmopolitan thinker are writing mainly is about how do we manage what they consider necessary universal principles that unite the human race with the respect of diversity that characterizes the human race. So it's in between universalism and localism or particularism, which nowadays we would say is nationalism. So that's what cosmopolitanism is for me, and I think for many contemporary political thinkers who wrote about cosmopolitanism. The accusation of cosmopolitanism, this is an interesting topic which I write about in my PhD thesis, because my PhD thesis is on a figure called Anacharsis Clotes, who partook in the French Revolution, and he was very, very hated afterwards. He became a figure of hatred, and he was one of these that was accused of being one of these Illuminati or sect of cosmopolitanism, and he was the leader of this sect of cosmopolitanism. And all these, I think, come from people who were against the revolution, I think, and that considered the revolution as then equated the revolution with this movement of cosmopolitanism.
Thank you very much, Rémy. There is a new question on the chat board. Do you see a significant connection between Rémy's interest in cosmopolitanism and his involvement in Freemasonry, which, according to the information you presented to us today, came some years after the pamphlets? So do you think one led to the other in any way?
Sorry, I was trying to read. Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Do you see a significant connection between Rémy's interest in cosmopolitanism and his involvement in Freemasonry, which, according to your
yes,
presented, came some years after the pamphlets was published? So do you think one led to the other in any way?
Yes, so that's a question I didn't raise in my presentation, but that I raised in my article, is that I couldn't really find a precise date for when Rémy joined the Freemasons, and it's a bit of a, I don't know if they are historians of Freemasonry, but from what I understood, from what I read on the history of Freemasonry, it's not necessarily the date where we have a document that says he's a Freemason, that can be used for saying it could be that the person was a Freemason before the official document. So the official documentation is that he's an orator in the Lodge of the Ninth Sister in 1776 when it's created, but I think it's very unlikely that he was not a Freemason before that, because even according to the regulation, he wouldn't become from the start an orator in the lodge, and there is so many parallels between and some Freemasonic cosmopolitan symbolism in the work, that you could make a good case for the hypothesis that he was already a Freemason at the time, and that this pamphlet maybe it was written as a work to be published to prove himself worthy of being a Freemason at the time. Maybe it was his yeah.
Thank you, Frank. I remember actually that part from your article where you use this convincing reasoning that possibly he was actually initiated earlier because he couldn't become all of a sudden actually the orator of one of the orators of the Lodge Nine Sisters. Okay, I have. Let me check this again. I have actually a very short, okay, so rather than two, I have just one short question. You mentioned that Rémy's understanding and interpretation of cosmopolitanism was rather Eurocentric, Frank, not truly global or universal. Could you tell us a little bit more about this Eurocentric approach of Rémy?
Yes, so I only touched upon it, but I think it's fair to say that also a lot of what people are writing are based in themselves on what they know, which is one of the issue for what, as I said, cosmopolitanism is an ideal, because I think it's very challenging to sort of abstract yourself from what you know and your own experience. So I think that it's very clear from what he's writing that it's infused with European history and the issues that Europe has with wars and the balance of powers and the kingdoms and so on, and also because he writes at some point that the idea that Europe is the leading now with the Enlightenment is sort of leading the way for the world of how to do things. Yeah, so that's two very important elements, and also there are not so many references, but there are also not many non-European references. He makes the reference to Sadi. And probably because he read Voltaire, and Voltaire wrote as Sadi in the preface of Zadig. And there's, yeah, I don't remember which, but that was also one of the what Voltaire was reproaching Rousseau, for instance, when Rousseau was writing about the idea of having a universal Congress, and he was writing mockingly that the Chinese emperor was not invited to this Congress, and so that it was not really cosmopolitan.
Yeah. So about Europe in the 18th century, you also mentioned this very interesting pamphlet, Le Café Politique d'Amsterdam of Périssé. And Périssé, I mean, he was, unlike Rémy, a public figure, a former French minister. So was Périssé's pamphlet a sort of attempt to shed a negative light, I mean, on cosmopolitanism in a political sense? Because that was basically the discussion between a Frenchman, a Dutchman, an Englishman, and a cosmopolite. So was really Périssé, what is your impression? Was he trying to shed a kind of negative light, as you mentioned in your presentation, in a political sense on cosmopolitanism?
Yeah, no, I don't think so, or at least not consciously. I mean, what he was doing in this pamphlet, I think, is just trying to justify his own policies, and he's just and he's justifying them by writing through a supposedly cosmopolitan figure who so he's abusing, in my view, the rhetorical stance of being a cosmopolitan by defending some policies that he made himself against an Englishman, a Dutchman, and so on. But I don't think that he's consciously, and also because cosmopolitanism, as I tried to present, also was not really a conscious philosophical position at the time. So I wouldn't think so, no.
Okay, and then I'm checking the chat board, and not to miss any of them, a very short question by Hasu Joshi. Do you have to be a libertarian to be a cosmopolite? How would you respond to that?
Well, there are very various branches of cosmopolitanism that you could have, and certainly there's a liberal cosmopolitanism that is probably the dominant idea nowadays. A libertarian cosmopolitanism, as we understand libertarianism nowadays, is probably what a lot of people were thinking of in the 18th century, and that is because, for instance, Claude's because there was the physiocratic movement that had this idea that nature and applying the laws of nature, what is considered laws of nature, would lead to a perfect and harmonious society. What is wrong is the artificial societies that we have created that are not functioning, and using these natural laws would create perfect markets and then you wouldn't need a government. You wouldn't need a state because everything would be fine. You only need a government and a state because things are not fine. So that would be the sort of reasoning behind it. So you could call it a libertarian cosmopolitanism in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Frank. I guess we don't have any other questions. So I would like to thank the audience also for all these interesting comments and the questions. And of course, I would like to thank you once again, Frank, for this fascinating subject. And I mean, and as you mentioned, actually, of course, you didn't have enough time to mention, of course, all the aspects of your research, but they are already on your outstanding article, which was very recently published, right? It was like February or March 2022?
Yes,
okay,
February online, not yet printed, but online it is.
So I guess several of us will be looking forward to...
So send me an email and I can send you a copy if you don't have access.
Thank you very much, Frank.
And thank you very much again for inviting me. It was really a pleasure to present my work to you.
It was our pleasure having you. So I wish everybody good evening, and hope to see you in the next lectures of the OpenLFM. So à la prochaine. Have a good evening.
Bye. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.